Hi, Jennie. Thank you so much for joining us today. You've dealt with some serious safeguarding concerns in your career. Let's start there. Give us a bit of an overview of what you've dealt with.
Okay. Firstly, thanks for having me today. So really nice to chat to you. Secondly, maybe not so nice to chat about some of the serious safeguarding concerns, but yeah, unfortunately, I have dealt with quite a few over the years. So my background is in youth work and specifically with young people within the housing and homelessness sector. So you can imagine that's mostly residential based services. So young people are living in the services and the amount of violence, so we call it serious youth violence, the amount of violence that young people are exposed to nowadays is just off the charts. And so a lot of the safeguarding concerns, incidents, disclosures I have had to deal with have been really serious. I mean, just to give you some examples, I worked with a young boy who had been stabbed by his stepfather. That was a few years ago. The most recent one, and actually the one that kind of tipped me over the edge in terms of making me realize I don't think I can do this anymore, was a young person being stabbed to death in the service. So I was an area manager. I had 3 local authorities in my patch, and I had different services in each of those local authorities. And a young person was stabbed to death by another young person in one of those services. He died on the floor in reception with the manager trying to give him mouth to mouth. It was horrific, absolutely horrific. And it was, like I said, that it was at that point that I started questioning my life choices. It was like at that point, it was like I don't know if I can do this anymore. And I probably should also say at that point I'd been doing it for 25 years, so this was not new to me. But there was a real accumulation, I think, over the years. And I also want to say, actually, around that point of kind of youth violence, because I have been in the sector for such a long time, I've really seen the change. So 25 years ago in homelessness, of course, there was violence, but it wasn't so prevalent as it is now.
Yeah.
Now, I think the primary issue, if you like, that we're working around with young people who are homeless is violence. There's an enormous exposure in their lives to violence. And then by default, then staff are also exposed to that violence, trying to work with them, trying to protect them, trying to support them after they've been in a violent environment.
What would you say would be the impact on staff of the front line
Mm,
who have dealt with traumatic events like this for years
yeah.
and gone from one thing to the next? What's the impact on them?
There's so much I can say about this. I really do believe that it can have an accumulative effect in your own nervous system. So the first incident might be really shocking, or maybe it isn't. Maybe maybe you kind of absorb it and kind of just get on with the next thing. But I think if you are in any sector where you're being exposed to this a lot, it is going to have an impact on your nervous system. Now, whether that is kind of having your own major stress response. So it could be PTSD, it could be complex trauma, or what we do see quite a lot is where the stress and the trauma is being internalized and staff end up kind of being desensitized to it. It's almost like there's a shutdown. It's a method of emotional regulation. Actually, it's like I can't deal with this at all, so I'm not going to acknowledge it at all, and I'm going to completely deaden myself to this as an issue. So you get staff being kind of really desensitized to the point where really violent kind of crimes and incidences are being normalized. Sometimes staff are not even seeing it as a safeguarding issue anymore, or concern anymore, because it's almost like this is just normal. This is what young people are living, and they're not even spotting it anymore. So that's a real problem. But ultimately, all of this is going to wind up leading to some form of burnout, in some shape or form. There's no way that staff can continuously be overloaded with this level of trauma and death, particularly, and it not impact on them, because we're not really offering the support that we should be offering to staff that are exposed to this.
I, you're completely right. Like when you've been up against it and dealt with really, really serious concerns,
Mm,
you do tend to find your coping mechanisms. Mine was to have a sense of humor in it.
yes, yes.
And obviously I had to be very careful about who it was around. But the fact is that I
Mm,
did start to get to the stage where I was like, well, actually, maybe that's not healthy, the way that I'm thinking, what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I also, unbeknown to me, and I didn't join the dots at all, but I actually got diagnosed with depression and
Mm.
anxiety.
Yeah.
And it was getting worse and worse and worse. But yeah, I was obviously going, well, I'm supporting other people. I got to keep going.
Yeah.
I also have a family as well. And so I needed to
Mm.
make sure that I was being a present parent.
Yeah.
And so you just keep going and you go, right, okay, well, I've just got to deal with this situation now. But I used to have this really great line manager when I worked at a secondary school, and they would check in on me. They would make sure that I was okay. But one of the things that I found really, really helpful was then they said to me, when you get to the stage and you're dealing with a safeguarding concern and you're just dealing with it as if it's a number, it's just another thing that's come
Mm.
across your desk,
Yeah.
and you don't tend to feel emotion behind it,
Yeah.
that it's time to get out.
That is amazing. That is an amazing thing that somebody said to you. I'm going to ask you whether you did get out then, or if indeed it did happen. Did you get to the point where it was just a number? You know, where people just turned into numbers. It's just another scenario.
You know what? This is a safe space
Yeah.
with our audience as well to admit that actually, yes, I did get to
Yeah.
that stage where it was just a number.
Yeah.
And I realized at that point it was best that I needed to get out. And that was because it wasn't just because of what was going on with the safeguarding concerns,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, where I did go on to, the culture wasn't amazing. And the safeguarding culture was incredible. Sounds like a bit weird, contradictory here, but there was certain aspects of management leadership that I found very, very tough. And as a result, it was basically I was going through the motions for a short amount
Yeah.
of time. And I found actually that was during lockdown because I became overwhelmed. My cases went up by 50%, my
Yeah.
staff went down by 50%, and I became overwhelmed and burnt out.
Mm.
And I didn't have any supervision support either, which I know we're going to get onto a little bit later.
Yeah.
So yes, I admit I actually got to the stage where I was only seeing safeguarding concerns as just another thing that was coming across my desk.
Yeah.
And I was struggling with even having any form of connection.
Yeah.
And I became this kind of referral unit,
And
essentially.
you are not alone. The vast majority of staff in the sector that I've come from are already at that place because, like you said, it's just being overwhelmed with the sheer amount of safeguarding concerns that there are, and they are really serious. And actually, not only are they really serious, but it's highly likely that we're not getting any support from statutory services as well. So then we lead into the realm of moral injury. So staff members are fully aware actually that this is a serious safeguarding concern, and they're making the referral, and social care is not even picking it up. They might not even reply to us. I don't want to make this into a social work bashing session at all, but like in our sector, it's been really, really difficult to get cases open, investigations started, support in place for young people. So staff in my sector are just kind of holding this without any recourse, without being able to do anything with it at all, without getting support, without knowing that the young person's going to get support. And it's interesting because I was just thinking, to some degree, we do have to shut down internally. To some degree, to protect ourselves, there has to be a little bit of, I'm going to have to create some distance for this because I just cannot cope with the emotion of this potentially. So in order for me to show up and do my job, I'm going to have to try and shut this down a little bit. But then, as you said, if you shut down so much that the people that you're supporting then become numbers, I think it is time to get out. It really is, because we're here because we care, right? That's where we want to get back to. We want to get back to that place where we're treating every single person as a person and we care about them and we want to support them properly. And but getting that balance, I think, is really tricky, really, really tricky.
Absolutely. And this is actually one of the reasons we created Cornerstone, is because I didn't want to see anyone going through what I did. I didn't want to see anyone getting to the stage where they were literally like, no, I just cannot carry on. I'm to all intents and purposes, I was good at my job. I enjoyed working with the people I was supporting and working with, but I was struggling, and I don't want to ever see people get to that stage. And actually, simple, easy wins can actually prevent that burnout from happening. And having effective supervision, having what we call it a health check, but it's actually an audit. We just don't like the word audit, and just counterproductive. If you don't want to scare people, don't call it. And so we basically make sure that our focus at Cornerstone is to be that cornerstone for a DSL, is to support those on the front line. And it doesn't necessarily have to be DSLs. I'm actually now supporting CEOs of charities, to youth workers, to those working in wellbeing and pastoral support. And it's across the board. And I'm loving it because in my heart, I'm going, I want to make sure that I prevent someone from getting to the stage that I did.
Great. And that was exactly my experience as well, Chris. So when I talked about the murder, that was also during the pandemic. That occurred kind of midway through the first year of the pandemic. And there had been a build up for my own stress levels to that moment. But at that point, I just suddenly was, I just thought, I can't keep doing this. I'm not making any impact here. We're not even keeping people alive, apparently. Like at the very least, we're not even keeping people alive in our services. And I don't know if I can do this any longer. And similarly to you, my mission since then has been, I want to help people so they don't get to that point, because I didn't have effective support in place to ensure that I could manage to be fair, I've got to be fair about this. During the pandemic, that was an exceptional time, right? No matter what sector you worked in, things you couldn't have planned for that.
Mm.
So that did add a lot to the stress there. But I think I want to make the point that people becoming burnt out through exposure to trauma, death, major safeguarding incidents, this isn't about a failure in resilience. Okay, this is not, a personal failure in kind of, I'm just not tough enough, or I'm just not resilient enough to deal with this. The failure is a failure in the systems. The
Mhm.
failure is that there's not systems in place to support people who are being exposed to this on a daily basis. And I think that there's a real failure in acknowledging that exposure to this is not normal.
Mm.
Actually, this level of violence and trauma, that's not normal.
Yeah.
If we had this conversation with anyone working in a different sector, they would be like, and I see it all the time. When you tell people that the amount of death you've come across, and people are like horrified because they're just so unused to that. But if you work in a sector where you're exposed to that, it becomes really normal, and it's not. And we need to be better at designing the systems so that we are open and upfront about it, talking about it, and support is in place for people who are working within it.
Yeah. I mean, just focusing on education at the moment, and somewhere I've worked predominantly over the last 18 years. And I've worked from the special needs primary all the way up to higher education. I've been
Yeah.
fortunate to work through each of those areas. And one of the things that I'm just struck by is the fact that, obviously, on the one hand, you can't go around saying, "Well, I've dealt with this situation this morning," and you just can't, because
Yeah.
you just wouldn't anyway. It's gossip, and it's unnecessary for people to know about this information. But the fact is, people don't seem to realise what you do in the support team.
Mm.
They just
Yeah.
think, "Oh, you're over there. Oh, you've got that student out of my class." These are the things I've come up against, or they keep on just running to you, don't you, the whole time.
Yeah.
There's a story behind everything,
Yeah.
and we, as a DSL, we're not trying to be annoying.
Mm.
We know the deeper kind of story behind why that child or that person is reacting and behaving the way that they are. But the thing is, we are constantly listening to some really horrific stuff.
Yeah.
And especially that, I mean, when I explain to people, just for example, what it's like either in a TAF meeting when you have to sit next to the parents.
Yeah.
It always happened to me. For some reason, I would have to be there, and then they'd ask me a question, and I'd have to be brutally honest
Yeah.
while sitting next to and that was the training for me in how to kind of say things in a compassionate way.
Yeah.
But then also you've got strat meetings,
Yeah.
and how fast paced and how much information you absorb in the space of
Mm.
15 minutes, and yet you walk out if it's in person, and you're sitting in your car just going, "Wow, did I just hear all of that stuff?"
Yeah. Yeah. Or what about the frustration of actually having those meetings and thinking afterwards, actually, there's still loads of information that was not discussed or disclosed,
Absolutely.
or like, but we haven't considered this, and there wasn't time, or like, yeah, like, and then that sense of failure for not inputting more or for not doing more. I mean, I don't know about you. Part of my burnout process, I think, was just the sense of responsibility that I felt that I had.
Yeah.
And I'm not responsible for one young person killing another young person, but I felt it. I felt horrifically bad. I was like, this has happened under my watch. That's how I feel. And I don't know how you separate yourself from that, to be honest. I don't know what the method is to separate yourself
Mm.
from that.
No. So, I mean, if let's just look at the journey of what we've
Mm.
spoken about here, we've both experienced really serious concerns.
Yeah,
We've then had to go through the process of obviously not only feeling responsible for it, but
yeah,
the fact that we then have to do the paperwork of it. We then don't have very many
yeah,
people we talk to about it.
yeah.
We then have to go to these really horrific meetings or
Mm.
like case reviews or serious case reviews,
Yeah,
which bring out even more information, which
yeah,
is actually just adding to the trauma within us.
yeah,
And then we go back to our workplace,
yeah,
say, for example, within education, and then you have to sit there and listen to someone, and this is rightfully so, but just pouring their heart out for something that might seem in that instant much less than what you've just dealt with, but you
yeah.
have to see it in their eyes.
Of
And so
course.
your emotions are going up, down,
Yes.
all around. And in all of that, amongst all of this, you don't have support and
Yes.
supervision. You're just expected to go back home,
Yeah.
you're to go and be a
Yeah.
husband, wife, parent, whatever it is, and life just carries on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's wild, isn't it?
It is.
It's wild. So in my sector, frontline staff are dealing with all of that. It's not the DSL. So the DSL is usually in housing, particularly, it'll be somebody quite senior in the organisation, but it's frontline staff that are doing all of the things that you're talking about. So they will pick up the pieces, they will make the referrals, they will be supporting the person, they will be attending the strat meetings or whatever. So it's either frontline staff or their managers, and it's kind of very held at that level. And the DSL in the organisation is usually more of a figurehead. So the DSL will only get involved if it's really complex,
Mm.
and or maybe we need some authority to push at local authority, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's yeah, imagine doing that and all of your job. But I actually wanted to say to you when you were talking about being a DSL in the education system is I always really felt for DSLs in schools, particularly because you are dealing with all of it. It's like on your own. Like, how do you not go absolutely bonkers? It is a lot. All those kids. How many kids were in your school?
So in one of them there was 1,200, in another one
God.
there was close to that. Um, yeah, I mean, and also the thing is, it's taken into account the demographic.
Mm.
I'm sure a lot of people would understand this. Is the fact that one of the places I worked was in not very affluent area,
Yeah.
but surrounded by
Yeah.
extreme affluence, if
Yeah.
you get what I
Yeah. Yeah.
mean.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was difficult in that context.
Yeah.
Every school has its difficulties, but then you take into account those things.
Well, we know it where there are higher levels of deprivation and poverty, there's going to be higher levels of safeguarding incidents and
Yeah.
concerns. That's the correlation, isn't it, in the
Uh,
stats?
and all of the youth clubs within the first 2 years of me working at this school
Uh,
in the local area had all been cancelled. All of them.
yeah.
There
Yeah.
was none, and then the closest ones were about 2 miles away, and
Yeah.
there was no transport link that was easy enough for them to get to it,
Yeah.
apart from going really like busy roads. And so it was basically they were all just stuck in the housing estate, and I just really felt sorry for them, to be honest with you. So we
Yeah.
tried to provide as much as we possibly could within the school, but there's only so much you could do at the school because you generally the second day they've gone out those gates, there's not much you can have control over what happens to them.
For sure. And it also means that where things are being closed down because of the cuts over the years, everything's being closed down, that all of the other support services have gradually got smaller and smaller and smaller. And then the onus is on the only agencies that are left. Is, for example, the school. So you're expected to do everything. You're expected to be teaching, you're expected to be parenting, you're expected to be safeguarding, you're expected to be nursing, and there's no resource. It's not like you're getting any extra resource for all of that. It is wild.
Having it removed is what's happening. It's over
Yeah.
the last I don't know, 12 years, just seems to
Mm.
be cut the
Yeah.
whole time, which is really sad.
Yeah.
I suppose before we end this episode today, what do you wish someone had told you before you started working in safeguarding or on the journey?
I think I would need to have heard it on the journey rather than before I started, because before you start, you're so naive and so hopeful and optimistic, and I don't know if I would have heard it before I started, but I suppose it would have been useful for at least to be acknowledged. We haven't really talked about this per se, but I think that one of the issues is that we are not in any sector really acknowledging the amount of trauma, violence, death that we are exposed to. So I think, that does need to be made clearer at the point of recruitment. It needs to be made clearer in every one-to-one or supervision you have. I know in education, teaching staff don't necessarily have monthly supervisions. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it's not necessary, is it? Unless you're in
Yeah.
early. Yeah.
So in my sector, we have monthly supervisions. They're not clinical supervision, but there is a monthly meeting with your manager so that you would talk about stuff like this, potentially. And in my sector, we've got better and better at introducing things like reflective practice. Again, I'm
Right.
not sure if teaching staff or staff in schools get to attend that kind of thing. So we're making moves to bring that kind of level of support in. I'm really digressing over this question now. I'm going to have to. What was the question, Chris? Bring me back to the question.
What do you wish someone had told you about your safeguarding before you started the journey in
Right,
it?
okay. What do I wish somebody had told me? I wish somebody had told me that. Are you familiar with the stress bucket model?
Yes.
Right. The stress bucket model, for your listeners, is this idea that we are a container of some sort, like a bucket. Okay. And we've got like a cloud over our head and it's dripping individual stresses into our bucket. And over time, that level of stress is filling up in the bucket. But we also have holes in the bucket to remove or release the stress. And so we must use those holes effectively. They're the things that we do in our lives that help us manage that stress level. We must use that effectively to keep that stress level down. I think safeguarding is exactly the same as that. I think we are a vessel, a container, and we can only contain an amount of violence, trauma, exposure to death, safeguarding stuff, if you like. It's going to be constantly dripping in our bucket, but we can only contain an amount before we completely overflow and burn out. And so again, we've got to find those little methods that we can poke holes in the bucket and release some of that safeguarding stress. I think it's exactly the same. So I wish somebody had told me, Jennie, you are going to be exposed to repeated trauma over the 3 decades nearly that you work in this sector, and you will not be able to continue unless you have really targeted methods of removing that trauma and stress from your emotional system, from your nervous system. And nobody has ever had that conversation with me, frankly, but that is the conversation that I would like to have with people in any sector now. There's only so much you can contain, and everybody has different capacity, but you are not lacking in resilience. There's nothing wrong with you if you can't cope with this. Actually, this is a normal physiological response for you to have to repeated exposure to trauma.
I think that's an absolutely brilliant answer. I could have said it better myself. And it just goes back to what was going in my mind of what I shared earlier, which is the fact that I completely burnt out, depression, anxiety, because I just didn't take into account that stress bucket kind of approach,
Yeah.
and acknowledge that actually what I was dealing with was just building up and building up and building up until it just went,
Yeah.
which is never a good thing. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed today's episode, Jennie.
Oh, Chris, thanks for having me. It's been a fantastic chat.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss another episode of Safeguarding Redefined.